Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, in the end, John Bel Edwards trumped all challengers, both local and national, in the Louisiana governor's race. We'll look tonight at the politics of the campaign as well as some key local races and what the results suggest for the future. We'll also look for some tax breaks that may have come with the city's new budget, and also how New Orleans is the place to celebrate the upcoming holidays. That and our Future Watch segment, updating the status of the flu, are on the chart for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Stephanie Grace, political columnist, the Times-Picayune New Orleans advocate, and Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. And we just had a governor's race. Errol, the results are in.
Yeah, we've got some numbers to look at, and this time it's not pages and pages of numbers, but very simple and right to the point in terms of the victory. Edwards' victory was by 40,000 votes. You know, people have been saying it was a razor-sharp victory. To me, 40,000 is not razor-sharp. 40 is razor-sharp. Okay. But I know there was 1 million votes, but still, it's a fairly substantial win. I mean,
it's substantial given the polls and given some of the expectations. I mean, it certainly is a narrower win than 4 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think it was, he had to fight a lot harder for it this year, certainly.
He had to, with considering the lone Democrat in such a heavy Republican state.
And the president coming in 3 times, and another time to Alabama, but the LSU game. And one thing that's interesting about those numbers, he won by about 40,000. The margin that was so striking to me was Orleans Parish. He won by 101,000 in Orleans Parish, where turnout was really strong. And that, I think, is one of the stories of this election. The cities really came out for him with a lot of help from local elected officials, anti-poverty organizations, churches. A whole coalition kind of came together that wasn't there even in the primary when he kind of underperformed in a lot of these areas. LaToya Cantrell was very involved, even though really they're not that close. They're not allies, but they certainly have similar interests politically. And she was right up there on stage with him on Saturday. There's a guy named Scott Arsenault who used to work for the state Democratic Party, now lives in Florida. They brought him back. He's kind of a turnout expert. Baton Rouge turnout was way up. Shreveport turnout was way up.
I thought an interesting graphic I saw in one place on election night was a color graphic, and you look along the river, like along the Mississippi, and as it breaks off into the chaff line, the red, and it says, well, he's strongest along the river. And so people wonder, what is it, river water or something? No, the river is where the cities are. Yeah. Okay, all along the way. And so you go into Baton Rouge, and you go to Alexandria, then you go over into Shreveport, and so that's where you're going to have the traditional Democratic base. And so
and even some rural parishes that have a lot of black voters who tend to be Democrats too.
I thought there was an interesting. There was a forum at the Manship Center Wednesday where they had the different campaign managers, and Brian Reed from the Responding campaign said something very interesting. He says the problem that they had was that they knew Edward was very popular.
Yes.
And so I think the way he put it, the way he was quoted, at least in the Advocate, is that, you know, our problem was trying to fire someone who people liked.
Exactly.
And so that was why they really couldn't go after his record, so they had to go to Trump.
And two things: they went to Trump, and they mischaracterized who he was. They tried to turn him into this almost Bernie Sanders type, this very liberal guy. They tried to imply that he was in favor of abortion rights. We all know he's not. They tried to link him to anti-gun efforts. We know that's not accurate, and I think people know John Bel Edwards, and they know that's not true. I mean, he's been very accessible, very visible his whole time in office, certainly during the campaign. So that really just didn't ring true.
And the backlash from the Trump effect seems like was that, yes, he did turn out a vote for Responding, but he also turned out a vote for Edwards by people who were scared by Trump.
There's another interesting little tidbit that I think a lot of people have been talking about, and that is to what extent Louisiana voters are acting like voters in other places. And in this case, certainly with this reaction to Trump, suburban voters. Jefferson Parish, heart and soul of the modern Republican Party in the state, right? Gave us David Vitter, gave us Steve Scalise, gave us Bobby Jindal briefly. That's where he went to run for Congress. 57% for John Bel Edwards. East Jefferson, Metairie, I mean, the Republican part of the Republican parish, Rispone won, but only by, I think less than 100 votes. So really extraordinary.
I think part of it, when people analyze these campaigns,
yeah.
they tend to analyze it in terms of who's supporting whom and ideology. But I think there's another factor in that Rispone was not a very good candidate. I think just
Definitely.
a lot of people at some point make a personality judgment where they don't see a major difference between the two in terms of what they're saying. And so when you don't have that, then they say, well, what about, they make the character evaluation, between the two. And I think that's where Edwards got a lot of points over Rispone.
He was so much more accessible than Rispone. He was so much more likable. I mean, Rispone had kind of a harshness to him. He attacked very harshly. There was name-calling the lunatic left, and he attacked his West Point, kind of record. I mean, some stuff that I think really came off badly.
And so Edwards had to also get some of those Abraham voters.
He did, and that was the other, I think, key to this. So Ralph Abraham was, of course, the third major candidate in the primary, Republican congressman from North Louisiana, Monroe, which is one of the places Trump went to try to drum up votes. And there was some real resentment, it seems, from people who really like Ralph Abraham. He's very popular in his district because Eddie Rispone attacked him pretty harshly in the primary. And he wasn't going to get all of those voters. Most of them are Republican, but John Bell got what he needed out of that area.
And early voting, too, was such a key part of this election.
Yep.
This is now, I guess, a growing trend.
It is, and I think those of us who analyze elections need to kind of figure out how to talk about it, because it's, now that we've had a few elections where there's been a lot of early voting, you can start to look at the patterns. One thing that a lot of people weren't sure about early was, are these early votes, are they people who are, does the early vote predict the election day vote, or is it different? Or if we have a lot of early votes, does that mean we'll get a lot of votes on election day, or are those just people who would have voted on election day? In this case, anyway, it was up both times.
And the early vote is substantial enough that it's going to change strategies, because it was always like the strategy. You wait till those last few days for all your dirty stuff. Now you got to do the dirty stuff earlier, but when you do that, then people have time to retaliate and to sue you, get it off, and so you can't get away with it if you couldn't pass.
And I think we haven't. Those of us who kind of follow campaigns closely haven't really adjusted to the new kind of calendar of an election yet.
Those who are necessarily running the campaigns, too.
Exactly.
Like Carol said, strategy is going to have to probably now be revised a little bit.
Yeah.
So the governor has won re-election, another 4 years.
Yes.
Now he's going to have to govern. And it might be a little bit tougher than it's been because of the Republican legislature.
Well, it was pretty tough the first time around.
It was. I was going to say, it wasn't easy, but it's not going to get easier.
Sessions
So that's one thing that's off the table, actually. The legislative sessions, this is probably a good thing for him, although it has kind of a negative side to it. There's no emergency anymore. We're not in a budget hole. We have a surplus, actually. The budget things are pretty good, which is one of the reasons I'm sure he was reelected. And
now it's got to stay good, though.
Now it's got to stay good, but also, even in this very contentious environment we had over the last 4 years, they had to finally come together and do something. And it took all those special sessions, it took all that partisan fighting, but they did. They came together and they came up with this tax deal, and so now there's kind of nothing that they really have to do together. So I feel like maybe
You're going to need to find a new John Ilario, though.
I don't think there is no new John Ilario.
Let's talk about the legislative composition, because we had some important races, too.
We did. We had a lot of turnover because of term limits. This is a big year when a lot of people, John Ilario, first among equals, forced out. John Ilario was the Republican Senate president, but he was a very close ally to the Democratic governor. Those days, I think, are over. The Senate has a Republican supermajority. If they hold together, that means they can overturn a veto. They're not going to all hold together. I mean, that's probably a pipe dream, but it's going to be much more conservative. The House is going to be more conservative. They didn't quite get the supermajority.
But they're close.
And the first thing I'm looking at is what happens, what does John Bel Edwards do when the House and Senate start to pick their leaders? Because remember, historically, the governor has played a really strong role in that. The governor has kind of picked who he usually, sometimes she, wanted to be the Senate president and House Speaker, and that person usually got the job. That didn't happen last time in the House. John Bel Edwards supported Walt Leger, a Democrat. The Republicans who controlled the House rejected that. I mean, there's no way a Democrat is not in the mix this time, but the question is, like, John Bel Edwards would like to have a friendly person, but he has to play it really carefully because, if somebody looks like his candidate, then, that person will have a lot of opposition.
Let's touch on some of the races.
Some of the races.
Yes.
In Orleans, we have some new women, so we're going to Amy Freeman in replacing Neil Abramson. Mandy Landry replacing Walt Leger, again, who's term limited. Candace Newell out in the East. Joe Bowie from the House is moving into that J.P. Morrell Senate district, so that's Orleans, St. Bernard, and West Jeff. So a lot of turnover in Orleans. There was a lot of turnover in Jefferson, but a lot of those elections were settled earlier. Secretary of State reelected. It's interesting. Kyle Ardoin is a Republican. He ran against a Democrat who wasn't very well known. And you can see in some places that there was real ticket splitting. Like the vote for Kyle Ardoin was, people here tend to vote for Republicans, and that was the general Republican vote. So you could look at places like Jefferson and St. Bernard, where John Bel Edwards also won, and see that, a lot of people voted for a Democrat for governor, but the Republican for Secretary of State. That was the only other statewide race. There were some ballot questions in Orleans. The mayor had 4 ballot questions she was pushing. 3 of them passed. The one that didn't was the tax increase. We're going to talk about the budget later. That's all tied up with that. There is going to be a new tax on short-term rentals. This is Airbnb, things like that. This is part of her agenda to get, when she went to the legislature last year, to get some more money out of tourism for infrastructure.
But, where we're seeing more and more women being elected as the chief executive of parishes, like mayors or parish presidents. We did see one defeat.
We did.
St. Tammany.
Yes. So we're up 1 and down 1, I guess, in terms of women parish presidents in the region.
But I think that's the first time I can recall a woman being defeated and elected here.
And that was in St. Tammany.
So that was St. Tammany. So again, Cynthia Lee Sheng was the first woman, is about to become the first woman parish president in Jefferson. Pat Brister is no longer going to be the parish president in St. Tammany. She lost after 2 terms to Mike Cooper, who had been the mayor of Covington. And, at Tammany, it was about taxes, really, more than anything.
So gender talks, but tax talks louder.
Probably. Certainly in St. Tammany it does.
Okay, let's talk about then the political leaders of the future. I mean, already we've finished this election cycle. Let's look forward to the next one.
Sure. Why wait speculating
sure,
until the next
Why wait a week even?
Well, it's relevant because his term is limited. The governors are limited to 2 terms. I don't think this election produced anybody who's going to be a major candidate in the next race. Sometimes it happens.
Yeah.
You have an election, there's this person finished 2nd and 3rd and said, well, he'll be back in 4 years.
Not here.
I don't think you're going to see Rasponi anymore. No. I don't think you'll see Abraham. I think Abraham got hurt as a congressman running for this because when they started talking about his voting record,
right.
I think people are going to take a look at that. So I think the people you have to look at are those who could have run but who decided wisely to stay out of this campaign. Billy Dungether be a possibility.
He's already hinting that he's running. Yeah.
Jeff Landry. All the congressmen in Louisiana except one are Republicans, and so there's a big feeding ground. There's no, the reality of politics is that whites get elected governor and blacks are being elected mayors, and so I don't think there's going to be a white Democrat out there. I can't even think of one who's like a major player. Now, and so
there are people who look at someone like Walt Leger and think maybe he could have run for attorney general. Maybe he would. He's a white politician out of Orleans, but not many. You're right. I would add Garrett Graves to that list, the congressman from Baton Rouge, who is a lot of people are thinking could run for governor and would like him to.
But as I said, we just finished this election cycle.
Yes.
I mean, we were pretty early into these next 4 years. That is more than a lifetime.
But he's a duck. So.
Let me just mention this. This is wild speculation. All right. Sometime next year, there's going to be a Democratic nominee for president.
Yep.
That nominee is going to have to look for a vice presidential candidate. Whoever that Democratic nominee is going to want to counteract the liberal image, especially if they're running against Trump. would John Bel Edwards
No,
not look good?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Because he is anti-abortion, and that will never fly with the National
Party.
Democratic Party. And if you doubted that, all you needed to do was watch the Democratic debate this week.
Right.
Because there was actually a question about him. Does a guy, I mean, John Bel Edwards is the star of the party this week, right? He just beat Trump. He just won governorship in the Deep South, and the question was, is he even welcome in the party? And the candidates all kind of talked around it. I mean, it's a non-starter, I would say.
Any other names that you can think of? What about from the legislative slate for the future, do you think?
Governor or
for statewide, for anything pop into your head?
You know, you mentioned mayors. It's hard. You know, mayors generally don't get elected, but LaToya Cantrell is early in her tenure, and people are watching her. I think people are watching Helena Moreno. In the legislature, some of these guys who are just term limited out, Walt Leger, J.P. Morrell, certainly have bright futures ahead of them if they want them and if they can find a place.
I think Helena Moreno is definitely a rising star.
Yeah.
Either at the city level or at the state level. She has some options right there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this election cycle down, we have our governor, incumbent governor, reelected for 4 years, and he's got quite a job before him dealing with the legislature in these next 4 years.
That's what my Sunday column is about, by the way.
Okay.
So read
All right,
the
we'll be looking for that stuff.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. Okay, Ms. Dawn, over to you. The flu season is upon us.
And it is upon us with
Is
a
it really?
vengeance. Louisiana has been the hotbed of activity in the nation
Really?
for flu or flu-like illnesses for 4 weeks running. That's it's rare for it to be here so early. Usually we peak in about January. There's no rhyme or reason to why Louisiana is the hotbed. I talked to Dr. Fred Lopez, an infectious disease specialist this week. He said, Dawn, if you can figure out why we're the hotbed of activity, please call me back, because it's a mystery. They really don't understand flu season until they're looking at it in a rearview mirror and how it moves and how it gets here. It's been most active in Louisiana, and then it's also active in California and in Maryland, and not the contiguous states.
Yeah.
So it doesn't even, it's hard to figure out why it's so busy, but it has been so busy. And it's a lot of the B strain of the flu virus. The flu vaccine covers a couple of A strains and a B strain. Usually nationwide, the A strain is the most active. Right now, nationwide, the B strain is most active, and we're seeing it earlier than normal. So that causes a potential nightmare situation if you've been sick with the flu right now, because if we end up seeing that A strain at the time of year we usually see it, you don't have any natural immunity built for the A strain. You're going to get the flu a second time. The flu shot does cover all of it. It's not completely effective. We all know sometimes you get the flu when you've already had the flu shot. It is helpful to reduce the effects of the illness and shorten the duration of the illness. So it's definitely worth it to still get the flu shot. It takes about 2 weeks to take effect for the immunity to develop in your system.
And the shots certainly are available. I mean, you go to like any drugstore, there's a sign, free flu shots.
You could get them at the grocery store. You can get them at urgent care clinics. You can get them all over the place. There also is a new drug that was just approved in October of last year by the FAA called Baloxavir, and it's a novel drug. It's a one dose, one simple pill instead of the Tamiflu that lasts forever and ever, and it seems to be reducing the duration of the flu even maybe more quickly than Tamiflu. So there are some new treatments on the market. The best treatments are getting a flu shot and staying away from others if you are sick, because it spreads like wildfire, but it is definitely going around, and they don't know why. We also are a state where we vaccinate less than other states. Nationwide, about a little less than 50% of all adults get vaccinated. In Louisiana, it's about a third.
Is there still a conspiracy theory out there about flu shots?
There are all sorts of theories about vaccines in general. Sign on to any parenting blog anywhere, and you could have your fill of reading about what's right or wrong with vaccines.
Dawn, are we seeing a certain population group that's being impacted? Is it young children? It's older adults?
It's all over, but it spreads kind of typically where people are gathered in large groups. So schools have been hit especially hard. You know, in my children's school, I found out, half of the 7th grade was decimated. My daughter was in 8th grade. 3 of them were out. They're a small class, but 3 of them had it exactly the same time. So it's coming in groups.
Okay, so flu shots are advisable.
Go get your shot. Because flu season lasts typically from October till May. So there's plenty of time to still get sick, unfortunately.
Okay, and if you get it, stay home.
away.
Right. Really.
Stay home.
Don't try
and
to
keep
infect
your
others.
coughs and your sneezes in your elbow, not your hands, because that germ, if I cough and then touch Errol's mug, that's going to last on his mug for about 24 hours.
Hey, it's almost carnival time. Get those flu shots now.
Yes. So you don't throw the flu with the beads.
Oh, boy.
Yes.
All right, Stephanie, you mentioned it a little bit ago. The city of New Orleans, the council just passed a new budget, and so are people going to get any tax breaks with it?
It depends. Some will, some won't.
Yeah.
And it's not a tax. It is a tax cut, sort of. So let me back up. The city passed a $726 million budget this year. That's about $11 million more than what they had last year. What has been hovering over all of this is the assessments, the new assessments that came out earlier this year, property assessments, which dictate your tax bill. And those, in some cases, went up a lot. So there are a lot of people who still are going to see a higher tax bill. What happens when the assessments go up, that the city, the different taxing agencies are required to roll the tax rate back so that the amount of money they're expected to take in is the same, so they don't get a windfall from higher assessments. But then they have the option of rolling it back forward so they can capture that money, some of it or all of it. So that's been the debate, what the city council would do. The mayor originally wanted them to roll it forward and collect more money. Infrastructure needs all the stuff she's been talking about. The city has tremendous needs. That's her argument. The council very sensitive to the fact that people are getting slammed, and there actually was in the middle of all this, there was a tax proposal on the ballot that went down, I'm sure because of this. But in the meantime, the city had to make this decision, and what happened was a little surprising, is that the mayor and the council got together and decided to roll it all the way back. So that means that the tax rate is going down. So if your assessment didn't go up, you're going to get a tax break. If your assessment went up more than a little bit, you probably will pay more taxes, but not as much as you could have. If you're like me and you're in one of those areas that the assessor didn't get to this year but will next year, you're going to, I'm going to get a little bit of a tax break, and then they'll probably go up again next year. So, but this was really an attempt to ease some of the pain that, and people, these politicians are hearing about it. People are really talking about these new assessments. So it's a $4.6 million cut. That's from taxes controlled by the city council. And they even kind of played around a little with that, because some areas are going to get more money and some will get less. Sewage and Water Board will get more, Police and Fire will get more, Audubon Commission will get less, libraries will get less. They kind of played around with the distribution in order to fund some of these things that they and the mayor really want to fund. I should also add that there are other taxing agencies that control some of the money on your bill, including the school board, the Orleans Parish School Board. That's the other big one. They rolled it forward. They're capturing all the money out there that there is to capture. And that's two reasons. One is that they're supposed to be getting a cut in funding from the state, so they need to make up for that, they say. And the other is that the people who run all those charter schools came to them and said, look, we really need the money. And the school board did listen to that.
Okay, all right.
Is that all perfectly clear?
It is really. Thank you,
And
Stephanie.
the tax bills themselves will be coming out soon.
Okay.
So,
Merry Christmas,
yes.
right, when you get your tax bill. Okay, Dawn, and speaking of Christmas.
Speaking of Christmas and
the
taxes,
holidays.
Yes.
Our Tourism and Marketing Corporation would like to collect more from tourists than locals, and they put an ad out nationwide. Let's take a look at that first.
Most of us spend the holidays the same way. Year after year, passing off routine as tradition. Thing is, we don't tell stories about what we do time and again. Nah, stories are for first times, for new loves, wide eyes, and once in a lifetimes. There's comfort in what we've always done, but there are stories in what we do next.
This is an ad campaign to get people to visit New Orleans during the holiday time. It's running nationwide with specific focus in places like Atlanta and Houston to bring tourists in and experience holidays New Orleans style. That's been a theme for about 35 years. The French Quarter Festival group has done holidays New Orleans style. So they're trying to capture that allure of the city, you know, leave with a story, not a souvenir, as we all said before the show. How about bring your souvenir too, and your story?
Yes.
But this is this campaign is now running through December, so.
It's really beautiful. So that was run by what?
The New Orleans Tourism Marketing Corporation put it together with the French Quarter Festivals Incorporated.
And some of the events are, I know they have the
Réveillon dinners, the concerts,
at St. Louis Cathedral, and they're wonderful.
The candlelight singing in Jackson Square.
And the event at the convention center where they have like Christmas Wonderland.
New Orleans, Christmas,
and of course,
New Orleans.
Celebration of the Oaks, which
right.
And now you've got the zoo lights at Audubon Zoo too. So you've got things at Audubon, City Park, downtown, French Quarter. There are a whole lot of places where you can capture some
and
wonderful
the hotels,
stories.
like the Roosevelt Hotel lobby is another
and this
one
is always
too.
a downtime for conventions. And
Right.
stuff.
Well, and we're between conventions and between the national championship football game.
Right.
There's big stuff on either end. They just try to fill in the middle, and this
And
is
more and more, New Orleans is becoming a destination for the holidays, not only for Christmas, but certainly for New Year's too. So
And
come on down and
Halloween.
enjoy it.
And Halloween.
Just definitely too. So, okay, all right. Well, looking ahead, speaking of holidays, what's going to be going on?
Well, remember the baby cakes.
Yes, we do.
Who've moved to Wichita, and with big fanfare last week, they announced the name for the team in Wichita. Mercifully, they've done away with baby cakes. The Wind Surge. All right, the Wichita Wind Surge. Ironically, the team, when it was originally the Zephyrs from Denver, a zephyr is a wind also.
Yes.
It's not a roller coaster, people think. It's a western wind. And so twice in this franchise's history has it been named after the wind.
Well, to people of a certain age, Zephyr is the roller coaster.
Sure.
Okay. All righty. Steph.
Don, you mentioned the National Football Championship. It happens to be on the same day that John Bell Edwards will be getting inaugurated. So if a certain team is in it, I'm guessing things will wrap up early in Baton Rouge and everyone's going to come down to New Orleans.
I think you probably are right on that bet.
Yes.
Don.
Well, so we just talked about that ad campaign that obviously is a paid campaign. There's also plenty of free advertising for our region right now with LSU and the Saints being ranked where they are. This is a big weekend to see if we can stay in that upper echelon sports-wise.
And it's hard to believe, but we are now really just knocking on the door of the holiday season, just really days away from it beginning. All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here, and thank you all for joining us. And, of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.